LAX is always busy, but especially these days with players coming and going out of USC. We got Matt Lowry on the line from Conquest Chronicles, SB Nation, to help us break down NFL draft departures, guys that have decided to stay. Then, of course, we've got the transfer portal humming as well. Matt, how you doing today?
Doing pretty good. And you know the saying, it's never a dull day with USC. So every time something happens, USC always finds themselves in the news. But it's a lot, like you mentioned, it's a lot with USC going on. So I'm excited to get to it.
All right, let's get to it. USC's main competitor for the Pac-12 South Division this past season was Colorado, who was undefeated until late in the season. And now they got a wide receiver in Katie Nixon, who caught 104 passes in his career with the Buffs and 7 touchdowns coming your way.
Yeah, so Katie Nixon announced yesterday that he will be coming to USC for his final season. As you know, grad transfer, he'll be eligible to play right away. But he adds a dynamic to an already talented USC wide receiving core who's losing a couple of key players. But anytime you add a player like Nixon, you add him with McCoy, you add him with Drake London, you add him to that mix of talented receivers. I mean, it's a good get for USC, especially somebody who's already familiar with the Pac-12. So Nixon's going to be is going to be an interesting and a good dynamic for this USC team who's looking to commit to the air raid.
Then we also have Ishmael Sopsher. I remember his recruitment to Alabama. He was a top defensive tackle. He's had his issues trying to get on the field for the Crimson Tide. And also safety Xavier Alford, who spent his freshman season at Texas, didn't get on the field much, but had 4 tackles as a freshman. So a couple high recruited players coming out of high school that went to other big name schools. They're coming out to be with the Trojans.
Yeah, and this helps out the defense who, has a few questions that need to be plugged, especially again as we talk the departures for of players, key players going to the NFL draft. But now you have somebody who can, I don't want to say he's going to replace the production of Talanoa Hufanga because that's pretty hard to replace, but somebody who you can plug in at that free safety spot. And then you have somebody who can, who helps with the depth at defensive tackle at the defensive line. So some good pickups, some key pickups, but USC may not be done there. I mean, there's another transfer who USC is targeting and pursuing heavily in Henry 2020 from Tennessee. He's a linebacker out of Tennessee. He was a freshman All-American, actually, I believe, his first year at Tennessee. And if USC can land him, that will really help USC's linebacking core, especially a team who's missing Palote Neoteote, who entered the transfer portal in the middle of last season.
Toto led Tennessee in tackles. He's a tremendous player. He is a tremendous player, and he's off to a great start in his career, and he would be an excellent addition. Ishmael Sopsher, as we mentioned, not much playing time at Alabama, but coming out of the 2019 class was the 5th rated defensive tackle in the country and was a top 50 player. So a lot of talent there that could be molded and grow into a position there at USC. On the flip side, there are some pretty significant losses. Chase McGrath, 32 of 42 on field goals, but lost his job last season. So he was the kicker, of course, in 2019 and before. Marquis Stepp had to share carries in a loaded backfield, so not necessarily a guy that was counted on heavily, but he showed us flashes, scored 3 touchdowns this past year. And then Pele Gaotiotie, he also is in the transfer portal, hasn't gone anywhere yet.
No, he hasn't gone anywhere. And honestly, it sounds like USC is trying to keep him at USC. As we mentioned before, it seems that USC is going to try to keep him there. That could be the case. We don't know. He could decide, you know what, I'm going to come back, or he may decide to go elsewhere. Marquise Stepp, as mentioned, committed to Nebraska, which is a good get for Nebraska, for a team who wants to commit to running the football there. And he, as you mentioned, he showed his flashes as well. I mean, he was hard, he got tough yardage for USC, but as you mentioned, anytime you have Malapei, Bebe Malapei, as well as Stephen Carr, it's kind of hard to see carries like that, because you have a similar running back, especially in Malapei. So it was hard for him to get carries. And then he was hurt the time that he got a lot of carries. He got hurt in that odd game against Arizona, where we saw 3 of the running backs get hurt in that game last year. So, I mean, ever since then, it was kind of hard for him to see carries like that. But I think at Nebraska, he can flourish. He'll see a ton of carries there. And I think that's actually a good situation for him, considering also he's from Indiana, so not too far from home.
MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, breaking down USC. We do so with Matt Lowry on SB Nation's Conquest Chronicles. Join him and the rest of the staff over there. If you enjoy the content here as well, hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications. That way you can keep up with our live streams in particular. All right. A lot of big defections from the defense that opted early for the NFL draft. Isaiah Polamau, fortunately, though, is staying put, third on the team with 40 tackles. So if you could set us up with the guys leaving and the guys staying.
Well, we'll start with the guys leaving because we always got to start there. And obviously, as you know, Talanoa Hufanga, he declared for the NFL draft. Had an amazing season this past season. I mean, he was pretty much all over the place on defense. Lined up at outside linebacker, lined up at free safety, lined up. He showed his versatility on defense. However, as everyone knows, the NFL draft was looming, and we knew he wasn't going to pass up that opportunity. He potentially could be a first round pick, could fall in the first round, maybe early second round, but he ends up leaving, as well as Elijah Vera Tucker, who leaves a void at the at that tackle position. He was outstanding this past season. Looked amazing. He could also find himself in that first round. I mean, especially with no NFL combine, you're gonna have to rely on the pro day as well. So he could end up in the first round. And Amon-Ra St. Brown, another outstanding receiver, who had an outstanding season. He opted to declare early, as well as Tyler Bonds, who opted to skip, taking an extra year of eligibility. As you know, he was a senior coming into this season. He could have went to the NFL draft after last year, opted to come back, played this year, and he had a chance to stay for another year. Granted, all seniors were allowed to return for the next season. He decided, you know what, I'm gonna go ahead and go to the NFL draft, which is understandable. And then Marlon Toyopolotu, who also was on that defensive tackle, had an outstanding season, ends up declaring as well. So another hit to the offensive, or not offense, to the defensive line. And as we all remember, Jay Tolafele, who opted out of this of playing this season due to COVID-19 and decided he wanted to prepare for the NFL draft. He opted before, when USC decided, or not USC, but when the Pac-12 said they were going to not play this year, he opted out. And then the Pac-12 decided, you know what, we're going to play in November. And he decided, you know what, I'm still not going to come back. I'm just going to put my focus towards the NFL draft. So some key departures there for USC. It was understandable. Granted, if they opted to stay and there's no guarantee of what next season will look like, then they pretty much hurt themselves. So you had to think, a lot of guys who are eligible to go to the draft this year decided, I'm just going to take my chance and go to the NFL draft. At least I get picked up. At least I'm on a team somewhere. If I don't get drafted, or if I get drafted late, I'm on a roster or competing for a roster time. Where Isaiah Polamau decides he wanted to stay, had a good season, had a solid season this past season, but I think he could do a little bit more this coming season. But as far as with the guys staying, again, you have Malapei and Carr, who also were seniors this year, decide they're going to take advantage of their extra year to get, to improve for the next season. So 3 key guys staying, but again, a lot of significant departures with key players going to the draft, which was expected.
Ross St. Brown caught 41 balls, 7 touchdowns. Vaughn's 33 catches, 3 touchdowns on the defensive side. As you mentioned, Hufanga all over the field, which means all over the stat sheet. Led the team in tackles with 62, 5.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, 4 picks. That's in a very short season. Man, had they played a 12-game season, tack on a bowl game, 13-game season instead of the 6 that they played, double those numbers, even more so than double those numbers, you're looking at 130 tackles and 8 or 9 picks and close to 10 sacks. He was all over the place, as you mentioned. Pelotu had 23 tackles, and he had 3.5 tackles for loss as well, and a couple sacks. Got Matt Lowry on the line from Conquest Chronicles, SB Nation, breaking down USC football. Tons of guys leaving, staying, coming, and going, both via the NFL draft and the transfer portal. Now we move on to the coaching staff, and we've got some news there where John David Baker moves on to Ole Miss, and that is had a domino effect of a number of people switching positions, being added and moved into some key roles across the board.
Yes, as reported, I believe it was last night or today. John David Baker will be leaving USC. He was USC's tight ends coach. He will be leaving USC to go to Ole Miss to join former USC head coach and offensive coordinator Lane Kiffin, who is the head coach at Ole Miss. So he is a part of a numerous amount of staff moves that's taken place here in the last couple of I want to say the last couple of months or so. You got to remember USC let go of their offensive line coach and Tim Drevno, who really the offensive line lacked production this past season in the run game as well as with the pass game as well. They also let go of their strength and conditioning coach, which turned out to be a shocking move. It was a surprising move that happened, but USC made a few additions here. They hired Marshall Harrington, who is the director of recruiting. Again, USC, they're known in football today. Let's put it like this: in football today, there's a lot of positions for recruiting. There's a lot of jobs for recruiting, and so USC go ahead and add Marshall Harrington, who have done an outstanding job. I believe at I can't remember where he was, but Harrington is added as director of recruiting. Robert Steiner, who is the director of football sports performance. Now, he was at Notre Dame. He was at Notre Dame last season and done an outstanding job with Notre Dame. I believe this is basically USC's new title for strength and conditioning coach, but they went ahead and added him to try to up their strength and conditioning, as well as figure out what they need to do to improve in that area. And for offensive line, they hired Clay McGuire. Now, Clay McGuire was offensive line coach at Texas State. Now, where the connection lies in is that him and Graham Harrell were on the same staff at Washington State when Mike Leach was there. Mind you, air raid, Graham Harrell running the air raid system at USC. They hire a guy who is familiar with the air raid and familiar with Graham Harrell. So now you have everything that's complete in the air raid system that that can make the offense click even more. Remember this past season, USC kind of took a little bit of a step back. It kind of looked like they took a little bit of a step back for with production reasons, for a lot of reasons, but now they look to improve on that side of the ball. They hire a new offensive line coach who is familiar with the system, who's familiar with Graham Harrell and his offense, and now they can try to take a step forward again in the production of this offense in Slovis's third year.
Talking USC football, we got Matt Lowry on the line from Conquest Chronicles on SB Nation here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. This is what you can do for us. Hit the like button. You can head on over to Conquest Chronicles, check out the work over there, and of course, subscribe. That way you can join in on the live streams that we've got running just about every day here at the voice of college football. So check out the live streams by hitting that bell for the notifications. That way you know when we're going live. All right, Matt, it was great to track you down and get the rundown on all these USC players going back and forth. So it's going to be an interesting offseason. This isn't the end of it. We've got National Signing Day coming up, the second version here, the first Wednesday of February. Not a whole lot there with USC. They pretty much have their class in place, but we may have a guy or two get picked up, and then we're headed off to spring camp here, hopefully. So good to see you. And you have a great day.
Thank you, Mark. You too. Thanks for having me.